Being brokenhearted, that's a rough thing to have to deal with. So many things can happen in our life that can just hurt us so badly. We feel like our heart is breaking in two. One of the hardest things to do is to lose someone that you love. A story is told about a young man who was in the army in Iraq, and he got one of those Dear John letters. And the letter came from his fiancée, and the letter said, "Dear Chris, you've been gone for quite some time, and we have grown apart. And I just want you to know that I'm breaking our engagement. I have found someone else, and we are going to be getting married soon. But I do have one request, Chris, that you would send me my photograph back that I gave you, because I need it for our engagement announcement in the paper. So sorry, Becky." Well, this was terrible for this young man. It broke his heart to get a letter like this, that the love of his life was breaking up with him. And not only that, she had someone else. And not only that, she wanted her picture back to put in the paper to announce her new engagement. Well, he shared this with the men in his platoon, and they came up with an idea. Each of those men in the platoon gave him a picture of their girlfriends. And he put it in an envelope, all these pictures, and he wrote a letter back to the girl who wanted her picture back, and mailed it back to her. And when she opened it, she found all these girls' pictures. And the letter that he wrote to her said, "I'm so sorry, but for the life of me, I can't remember which picture is yours. So please remove your picture from all of these pictures I'm sending you and return the rest back to me." Now, there's a right way and a wrong way to deal with heartache, but that was a good one. But it probably wasn't the right one. There is a right way and a wrong way to deal with heartbreak in our lives. Some become vengeful. Some become bitter. Some withdraw within themselves. Some run away from the problem. But I think one of the worst pains that anyone has to go through is sitting back helplessly, watching someone that we care about deeply suffer and die. I think we've all been there at some time. Maybe it was a parent. Maybe it was a spouse. Maybe it was a brother or sister, or, God forbid, our own child. But I think a child has to be the hardest thing in the world to lose. Mary, the mother of Jesus, had to deal with heartbreak. Heartbreak that no one, I don't think, has ever had to deal with before or since. Yes, parents lose their children, but it was different with Jesus as a son. Mary had the perfect child. Can you imagine that, mothers? A kid that listened to you. A kid that gave you no grief. A teenager that was able to get through those teen years without her even once wanting to kill him herself. Watching this perfect child who was teaching love and was living it, who was teaching forgiveness and living it, who was offering hope to a helpless and hopeless world. being beaten and crucified for a crime he wasn't even guilty of. How that must have hurt. Mary was in excruciating pain. At the end of his life, Jesus struggled through beatings, through mockings, through crucifixion. And Mary stood there by his side, unable to ease his suffering, to ease his pain, to help him in any way. She was helpless. Can you even imagine the heartbreak of a mother watching her son suffer like this? And even though dealing with overwhelming pain and sorrow, Mary provides a great example for you and for me for how to function in the midst of heartbreaking circumstances. What she went through was devastating, but she showed how we should respond to heartbreak. Today, I want us to look at Mary and how she dealt with all of this. She watched her son enter into Jerusalem, a king, a triumphant king, on Palm Sunday. And by Friday, she was standing, watching him die on a cross on a hill, abandoned by all his friends, save her and one disciple and a couple ladies that were friends and family. Mary. What Mary remembered. What did she remember while she watched, while she saw what was going on? Well, story is told about a man that went to his doctor in a state of anxiety. He was so worried, he said, "Doctor, you have to help me, I'm dying. Everywhere I touch, it hurts. I touch my head, it hurts. I touch my chest, and it hurts. I touch my leg, and it hurts. I know I'm dying. Help me." Well, the doctor looked at him and examined him thoroughly. And he said, "Mr. Johnson, I have good news and bad news for you. The good news is you're not dying. The bad news is you got a broken finger." Sometimes life is like that. There's good news and there's bad news. Mary remembered back to that day when she got good news and bad news. The day that the angel came to her and said, "You, young lady, are going to be a mother to the Son of God." She was unmarried, though she was engaged. And at this time, it was a big stigma to be pregnant outside of wedlock. She could have been taken out and stoned to death for this sin. Her fiancé Joseph could have called it off and made her live in shame the rest of her life. And as my grandma would say, didn't have to make an honest woman out of her by marrying her and allowing her to give birth before, or to get married before the baby was born. That announcement the angel made came with mixed feelings. Mary, I'm sure, was excited as she remembered about the announcement that she was going to get to be the mother of the Messiah, that she was going to get to have this baby boy that was going to be so special. But then reality set in. And she realized, too, that this was an awesome responsibility. To be the mother of the Son of God? Can you imagine, ladies, the pressure on a parent to be that mother? To raise that child? Can you imagine when he would run out the door and slam it and she would say, "What's the matter with you, Jesus? Were you born in a barn?" Then she'd have to think, yeah, he was. Can you imagine the stigma that she had to deal with of being a woman who was pregnant when she got married in a society that looked at her as a sinful, fallen woman? The things she had to deal with, the ridicule. Mary was likely considered even crazy whenever she told people that she was pregnant by God. That she had never been with a man before and she was still a virgin. But yet she was getting ready to have a child. Can you imagine the whispers? Can you imagine her walking down the street, even after having Jesus, carrying this baby, and people pointing and saying, "That's the nut job that thinks that she's the mother of the Son of God." Or others that would say, "That's the skank." These are the things that Mary had to deal with, and she remembered back to those things. What she had sacrificed, what she had done to follow God's will and to raise this baby boy to be the King of the Jews. And now he was hanging on a cross and suffering and dying. She remembered back to the evening of his wondrous birth, the mixed emotions of getting ready to deliver a child, but having no room at the inn. No hospitals to go to, no warm bed to lie in, only a barn, a stable where he would be born. She remembered after that when Herod was trying to kill all the baby boys in that vicinity of the same age as Jesus in order to get rid of this Messiah, and the trip they had to make to Egypt. How hard it is. You know how hard it is to pack up and go on a vacation for a week? Imagine having to pack up and move away for several years to a land that you knew nothing about, that you knew no one. And the pressure. And you didn't have much money anyway. She remembered these things. A short time after that, they had to pick up stakes and move again to Nazareth, a little backwoods town. It'd almost be like moving to Booger Hole, West Virginia. A place so far removed from what they considered civilization, a backwoodsy group of people, and that's where she had to live. That's what she had to deal with, facing the shame. Then, of course, there was that big trip to Jerusalem when Jesus was 12 years old, that they went to worship at the Passover. And after being there for several days, they left and forgot him. They lost their boy. They lost not just their boy, they lost God's son. Story is told about a boss at a big company that needed to call on one of his employees for some help with a computer problem they were having. So he dialed the number for the employee's house, and a little girl answered the phone in a whisper. "Hello?" Feeling put out by the inconvenience of having to talk to a little youngster, the boss asked, "Is your daddy at home?" "Yes," she whispers. "May I talk with him?" the man asked. And with surprise, the little voice said, "No." Wanting to talk with an adult, the boss asked, "Is your mommy there?" "Yes," came the answer. "May I talk with her?" And again the little girl says, "No." Knowing that it was not likely that a young child would be left alone and that she was lying to him about the parents being there, he asked, "Is there someone there besides you?" And the child said with a whisper again, "Yes, the police." Wondering what a cop would be doing at his employee's house, the boss asked, "May I speak with the policeman?" "No, he's busy," she whispered. "Busy doing what?" asked the boss. "Talking to Daddy and Mommy and the fireman." Growing concerned and even worried as he heard what sounded like a helicopter through the earpiece of the phone, the boss asked, "What's that noise?" And in a whisper, the little voice said, "A helicopter." "What is going on there?" asked the boss with alarm. In an odd whispering voice, the child answered, "The search team just landed the helicopter." Alarmed, concerned, and more than just a little frustrated, the boss asked, "Why are they there?" And in a whisper and a little giggle, the little girl says, "They're looking for me." They were looking for Jesus. When they realized after a day's journey that he wasn't with the men, Joseph didn't have him. He wasn't with the women and children, Mary didn't have him. They looked all over the camp where the people were, and they could not find Jesus. Now, I have lost some things in my life that have scared me and concerned me. I even lost my own son in DIY when he was a little boy. But we found him. But I can't even imagine losing the Son of God. That is a big mistake. Can you imagine the fear that they had as they ran back to Jerusalem to look all over the place to find Jesus? They finally found him, teaching. 12 years old, teaching in the temple. And whenever they came to him, they said, "Where have you been? We've been looking all over for you." He says, "Right here. I'm doing my Father's work." She remembered that, and probably if she recalled the frustration, she recalled the pain, the agony of having lost him, and then the joy and the relief, and maybe even the anger of finding him. As she stood and watched Jesus on that cross, these memories came flooding back. Family turmoil came to mind too, remembering when Jesus was baptized and began his ministry. As he would preach and tell people who he was, family members probably looked at him as if he were crazy. They wouldn't accept him for who he was. They would say, "Well, there's that nut Jesus, Joseph's boy, the carpenter, that thinks he's the Son of God." And he would have to deal with that, and she would have to deal with that as his mother. The seemingly abnormal behavior of Jesus undoubtedly brought unwanted attention to the family. She remembered all of that. And now she saw him hanging there, suspended between heaven and earth, wishing to go back to those days, wishing that she could turn back the clock of time, remembering Jesus. What Mary witnessed is the next thing that we look at here. She saw things, my friends, that no mother should ever have to witness. She saw her son rejected, her son mocked, her son falsely accused, her son spat upon, her son beaten to the brink of death, her son being paraded down the street with people yelling obscenities at him, cursing him as he had to carry his own cross. She witnessed her son falling beneath the weight of that cross. She watched as he was forced to get back up and walk the rest of the way to the hill of execution, Golgotha. She watched as he lay back on that cross. She witnessed every pound of that hammer against the spikes into his hands and into his feet. She witnessed the wailing and the cries of agony as they lifted the cross up and as it fell into that hole, jerking him, causing even more pain in his hands and his feet. She witnessed for 6 agonizing hours her son suspended between heaven and earth, forsaken by his friends and followers, forsaken, having his own Father in heaven turn his back on him because he was carrying the sin and the guilt of the world, and God is so holy he cannot look upon sin. And she listened to his words as he hung there. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And then finally, witnessing his last words. Father, into thy hands I commit my spirit. And he died. A mother should never have to witness something like that. Ladies, put yourself in that position just for a moment and the pain that you feel. Mary did feel it. Mary went through it. Mary saw things that a mother should never see. As our scripture that was read this morning from John 19, it says, when the soldiers had crucified Jesus, they took his garments and divided them into 4 parts, 1 part for each soldier, also his tunic. But the tunic was seamless, woven in one piece from top to bottom. So they said to one another, let us not tear it, but let's cast lots for it to see whose it shall be. This was to fulfill the scripture which says, they divided my garments among them, and for my clothes they cast lots. So the soldiers did these things. Mary witnessed all of this, and she never left his side. I know that people sometimes have problems with dealing with suffering and dealing with sickness and dealing with death. And it's hard. But Mary never ran away from it. Mary stood there. She put her own feelings aside. She put her own suffering aside. She put her own desires aside to be there for the one she loved, even though it was killing her on the inside. She sacrificed to be there for him to the bitter end. That's an example that she sets for us. To never forsake Christ, no matter how difficult it might be. No matter how painful it might be. We may be uncomfortable in the situation we find ourselves in, but she never walked away from Jesus Christ. No matter how bad it was, no matter what pain that she saw and experienced, she stayed there committed to the very end. That's how she responded. That's what she witnessed. How did she respond? Let's look at verses 25 through 27 of John 19. But standing by the cross of Jesus were his mother and his mother's sister, Mary the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to his mother, "Woman, behold your son." Then he said to the disciple, "Behold your mother." And from that hour the disciple took her to his own home. Most everyone deserted Jesus, and that's one of the sad things. When Jesus needed love, when Jesus needed support, when Jesus really needed someone to be there as he was, in essence, lying on his deathbed, less than half a dozen people, and he had touched so many. This was done out of love. Love. It's an unconditional commitment to actively pursue and secure the good of another through sacrificial behavior. Do we have that kind of love for Jesus like they did, like Mary did? Willing to sacrifice the ridicule, being willing to sacrifice the pain, being willing to just be there and support. Mary stayed by his side in the midst of heartbreaking circumstances. And folks, that's an example for us in our lives. No matter how bad things may seem, no matter how painful they may be, don't leave Jesus. Don't abandon him. No matter what is going on, no matter how painful, how much you don't understand what's going on, don't give in. Don't give up. Mary did not have all the answers for heartbreak, but she did provide a great example for whom to react, or how to react when it comes our way. There's a teenager who didn't want to be seen in public with her mother because her mother had terrible, terrible scars on her hands and arms. She went shopping one day with her mother, and her mother took her sweater off because it was warm, and someone was staring at her arms. And the clerk looked at it and just was horrified by how ugly and scar-ridden her arms were. And this was so embarrassing to the daughter that she began to cry and she ran off to the car. Later, the mother asked what was wrong, and she told her that she was embarrassed by her mother's scars and how people were looking at them and talking and making comments, and she didn't want to go out with her mother anymore because she didn't want to have to endure that humiliation. Understandably hurt, the mother waited an hour before going to her daughter's room and sitting down and for the first time telling her where those scars came from. She says, "When you were a baby, I woke up in a house that was on fire and burning. I could have easily gone out the front door and been safe, but you were upstairs in your bedroom, and the fire was so hot. But I knew that I had to try to save you, that I would rather die with you than live without you. So I ran into your room, and my clothes caught on fire. But I held you close to me, and I got down the steps and outside and saved you, not even a mark. But these are the scars that I received from that fire, saving your life." Stunned, the girl looked at her mother through new eyes. Weeping in shame and gratitude, she kissed her mother's marred hands and arms and never looked at them the same way again. When your heart gets broken, don't run. Stay close to Jesus. He will never disappoint you. That cross was the burning building that we just heard in this story. Jesus was willing to suffer to save you and save me. He gave his entire life for our salvation. And though it's difficult for us to see through the pain sometimes, Jesus always knows what's going to happen, what's to come. As our worship team comes, when Jesus was dying on the cross, he knew what was going to happen. Mary didn't. Mary thought this was the end. It was all over. But Jesus knew that it was just the beginning of a new life and a new hope for all mankind. You see, Jesus knew the end of the story. And that story is what we're going to be witnessing next Sunday. His resurrection. Let's look to that with hope and anticipation, even through the pain that we may be going through today. Let us look to him for the hope and for the comfort that only he can give. Let's all stand as we sing our hymn of decision.